Let's talk about the Knight of Seven Kingdoms again a little bit before we move on to the other things. So I'm going to have to open a few separate tabs because, again, I can't really show pieces of the movie. First and foremost, I want to say, as a storytelling device, I loved it. I loved it, The Trial of Seven. So for those who don't know, this is going to be a mild spoiler. So if you haven't watched it, do keep in mind that I'm kind of having a spoil. But what basically happens is this. At one point, our beloved protagonist Duncan punches the Targaryen prince in the face and kicks him. He does that to defend a woman, which, by the way, I thought was pretty cool because it's, again, the knight that is protecting the damsel in distress. It was refreshing to see it because now, with the new ideas and positions that a lot of productions have to follow, you can't do that because you need to have the empowered woman that needs no man. So they went old school with that, and I really appreciated it. It was refreshing to see. So anyways, that happens. And so after it, normally you would think, well, what's going to happen to the knight, to him, now that he freaking punched a prince? Now, in the real Middle Ages, he would have been beheaded. But this is a fantasy situation. So what they do is that he asks for a trial of combat. So normally, what would have happened even in this world is that they have a one-to-one duel, and then the victor, right? They had these in the Middle Ages, by the way. If you win, it means that God intervened and you won because you were just. Kind of that's the logics behind it. The problem is, though, that this guy is a scumbag. So what he does is like, no, I want a trial of seven, which appears to be some kind of archaic law that they used to have, and he's kind of calling for it. What that means is 7 versus 7. So he's, of course, banking on the idea that obviously everyone is going to fight with me. I'm the freaking prince. And no one is going to fight with him. And by the laws of this world, if he can't get 7 people, it's not that he can do 1 versus 7 on 3 versus 7. No, it means you were wrong. The gods didn't help because here it's plural. It looks very medieval Christian inspired, but it's just that they talk about a sort of a heavenly father, a heavenly mother. It's more like gods, plural, but kind of still reminiscent of the medieval Christendom. So that would be like, okay, the gods decided you weren't worthy then, so we're going to behead you. But he does. I'm not going to go into the details because I don't want to give too much spoilers, but he does. He does find 7 people. I mean, you can expect that because otherwise it would be the end of the story, right? And so we have this fight. And it seems to be a fight to either death or submission. So this is really intense. It's not like a joust. This is more than that. It's a duel that can result, because normally the joust, whether it be the Middle Ages or whether it be Game of Thrones, in theory shouldn't result in death. It happens in Game of Thrones that you end up dying. Some of the knights die anyways, because it's, and I think what they want to convey is this is violent. It did happen in the Middle Ages too, the knights died, but it was less common than it does seem to appear here. With that being said, fight 7 versus 7, I thought it was fantastic. Like, they did it really well. The organization of this begins on episode 4. Episode 5 is the one where we actually see the fight, and then I think it ends on episode 6. So it's kind of connected in between the various things. Now, we've already talked about, and look at this Armin doublet, by the way, it looks amazing, and he's wearing mail underneath. Oh, that's nice. I didn't notice this. We can talk about this. Did medieval people ever wear mail underneath an Armin doublet? For a 15th or 16th century Armin doublet, the answer would be no. But for a previous type of accaton or gambeson, it appears to be an option in iconography. Once again, since I have to specify because someone called me out, and I blocked them, but whatever, in chat, of course, this is not set in the Middle Ages. But isn't it fun to learn about our real Middle Ages since this is clearly inspired by it? And so we could say, look, in this world, they do it. Great. In our world, they only did it when it was a thicker gambeson or maybe some kind of, what's the word for it? The thicker ones that sometimes they did it and we see it in iconography, so you can see a little bit of mail coming from underneath. Very cool. I love the looks of it. The fact that he keeps it open like this, I've never seen it in medieval iconography. It would be usually nicely connected, but they used a multiple fabric bottom system, which is very common in the Middle Ages. It would be either that, multiple buttons that are usually made of fabric that go into this, or it would have been a lace. If you're enjoying this video so far, please take a moment to check out my Patreon page. With as little as a $5 support, you can help us ensure that we can continue to produce high quality and high researched content. And at the same time, you get access to polls, extra videos, unlisted streams, and much more. Thank you so much. So continuing, here we see a few knights. Yeah, I mean, I love them. Look at the lances. Yeah, so what's interesting is during the first charge, so he's getting ready, puts the helmet on. Of course, these helmets are not metal. You can tell because they squish when he touches them. I would have preferred... They still look good. They're not metal, though. You can kind of tell if you know what to look for. They're supposed to be metal, no. So in period, if we kind of suspend the disbelief, we can imagine, right, but they are supposed to be metal. So he puts on the helmet, he begins the charge, and he goes against, I believe, the prince. And the prince lances him and pierces his armor. So he gets wounded. Is that reasonable? Absolutely yes. So even if you're wearing proper riveted mail, what would that protect you from? We actually have mentions even in ancient Rome about that. And the Romans tell us that riveted mail, they don't say riveted, but all Roman mail was half riveted, half solid anyway, so we can imply by deduction. We are told that not only a soldier wearing mail was difficult to take out because you couldn't thrust with daggers and swords, it just wouldn't go through. But also we are told that there is this instance in the sources where this soldier falls on the ground and a cavalryman with a spear, not a lance, but a spear, thrusts him multiple times from on horse and it does not go through. So, if it's a spear, a dagger, a sword, and depending on distance and draw power, an arrow, the mail will resist. If it's a Mary Rose type of late 15th century longbow, you're gonna go through it and you're dead. Which is why in the late 15th century, wearing mail alone, it was not considered sufficient protection. Like at least some kind of brigandine, jacket plates, breastplate would have been needed for you to be adequately armored. In this case, it makes perfect sense because he has got no money. So it's kind of cool actually that it shows the difference between the highborn, he's wearing full plate, and someone who is not only a lowborn but a hedge knight, has got no money, so he got the mail, better than nothing, but the lance goes through, and that's absolutely reasonable. So would the lance go through breastplate? No. Unless it's like really cheap. And when I say cheap, there is a difference between cheap armor in the Middle Ages and cheap armor for us. Armor being cheap, usually in the medieval perspective, means that the overall shape is still correct, but it wasn't heat treated, may even have been iron, it might have been uneven in thickness, and generally speaking, what makes it cheap also is the level of polish. In modern, instead, reenactment, cheap armor, like the stuff made in India, as opposed to stuff produced by professional armorers, whether it be in Eastern Europe, Central Europe, or America and whatnot, England, the difference is that the cheap stuff, the form is wrong because they don't know what they're doing. But it's polished to like mirror because that's cheap now. You see how that's completely different. So sometimes people say, yeah, but even if you have like a cheap helmet made in India, it's okay because medieval people would have had cheap helmets too. Yes, but they are different. They're completely different levels of what it means to be cheap in period. It's still functional. It's still made by professionals in period, given. If you're having fun and you don't have much money and the Indian stuff, you have fun with it. That's what you can afford. That's what you can afford. However, I would suggest that if you have the ability to save up a little bit, maybe wait, and rather than buying a full suit that looks like shit, maybe buy a helmet and a breastplate that look decent. Medium quality. That would be my suggestion because it really will give you more of a feel of what it meant to wear something that it's accurate. But it's your money, you do whatever you want. So anyways, as I was saying, I've already said this in the previous review, but I love that they took inspiration from real medieval armor. You can tell because, I mean, look, the left pauldron is bigger and the right pauldron is smaller. That is because this guy is clearly right-handed, and so he wants to be able to operate whatever weapon that he's wielding with his right hand, in this case the lance, better. And what's interesting is that, yeah, as I was saying, his mail gets penetrated up to a certain extent. Probably the mail did slow down a bit of that penetration, but still it did happen. And it's also because one thing that they seem to be doing in this show, which is again very similar to the Middle Ages, is that they use a technique that is called, in French, is la lance couchée. So it's when you put the lance underneath your armpit to give it more stability, and it also kind of prevents it more easily because you want more of that power to be into the enemy, and it favors penetration, because if you only hold it with your hand like you would a spear, then it's only the strength of your arm, so you will go back losing some of that power. But if it's correctly placed underneath your armpit, then you can kind of resist that impact and so distribute more force into the enemy. And then even more so when you have a lance rest, which is the little addition that connects and makes it even more stable. They don't have those. I didn't see any lance rest, but fine. Now, eventually the combat moves onto hand-to-hand combat, like as we see in this image. And I love that he is half swording. Look at this. That's amazing. Like, guys, come on. We need to praise them. He's half swording. It makes perfect sense because he's fighting the freaking prince and the prince is in full plate. So good luck with that. At least with half swording, when you hold the blade as well with your other hand. And by the way, you're not, even if it's sharp, you're not going to cut your hand as long as you maintain a firm grip, because the only case in which a blade cuts is when it's allowed to freely move. But as long as it's kept in place and it doesn't move, it won't cut. And also he's wearing gauntlets, although then again, remember that the under part of the gauntlets is leather. This is not going to be metal. So if we click it, see if we can see it. Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. Look at this. And so given, the prince has all the advantages here. He's wearing full plate, kind of reminiscent of 16th century armor. He's got the shield. And this guy doesn't even have a helmet. Why doesn't he have a helmet? Well, because they did not follow my suggestion. Because I always say, guys, when you wear a helmet and you make helmets, whether it be for games or whether it be for movies that are set in a medieval period or are set in a fantasy that is medieval inspired, if you give them very large ocularia, you're going to get hit in the eye, which is exactly what happened to him. You can see the eye here. That wouldn't have happened if the helmet was historically accurate. I don't even care. I will not apologize. Anyways, that happens, and then when he falls, he gets all of the mud inside the helmet, so he's completely blinded and he removes the helmet. That's fine, because, I mean, if it's a good reason as to why he removed the helmet, in fact, because he couldn't see anything. I guess he can't remove the mud quickly enough. He's worried that the opponent is going to capitalize on that, so he removes the helmet. It's okay, and it also, once again, shows a massive difference in tech, which makes sense, because again, low-born versus high-born. If the same thing had happened to the prince, because his helmet is visored, he could have just lifted the visor. But with great helms, which is also one of the reasons why eventually they become like, nobody wants them anymore and everyone wants the tech with a visor, is because that's what happens. If the helmet gets compromised and you can't see well, you have to remove the entire thing. Given, if this was the 12th century, he would have been wearing mail. So at least he would have had a mail coif. If this was the late 14th century, he would have been wearing a secret helmet. So he would have had a very low profile, small iron skull. So even if you have to remove the great helm, you wouldn't be like this in our world. But for him, in this context, he has no money, he's got nothing. He probably couldn't even afford the freaking coif, so that's fine. That's fine. I love that he's trying to use half swording because this makes his strikes much more powerful when it comes to penetration. Still not gonna go through the plate of the prince, but do remember that when the prince, if the prince were to lift any of his arms during combat, you could try and stab under the armpit because there is only mail. You will have suits of armor in the middle 16th century that do figure out ways to cover in plate even sections where like you need complete mobility, but it's It's not in the show. So in this case, he still has an option. Or he could try and cut the inside of his thigh, which is exactly what he does. I love that. I love that. So pretty good fight. Of course, he's at a huge disadvantage. And in fact, when you see the way they fight in the show, you can tell that he goes very much for like massive swings, trying to capitalize on his strength. But the prince, you can tell by the way he fights that he appears more sophisticated. So it's someone who was trained in combat. Not necessarily in a HEMA realistic sense. You can still tell the actor hasn't got a clue what he's doing. But it still conveys the idea of he's using ripostes, he's parrying and countering in a way that would make sense in this scenario. And it once again underlines the difference in status. Because difference in status is not just money. Difference in status is, yeah, he trained a little bit with his previous lord, but this guy's been training with the best that the kingdom has to offer. And I love that you can tell. Very good fighting scene. Also notice that the hauberk is split in the middle. That makes sense because he's cavalry. So the long hauberks, we see this with Norman armor, for instance, of 1066, Battle of Hastings. A lot of Norman armor has this split when it comes to cavalry units, whereas you don't necessarily need this split if you are an infantryman, a billman, an archer, in fact, although then again, archers usually don't have the full hauberk, but it kind of depends. Context specific, I suppose. This is blood, it's not rust, so it's fine. Do keep in mind, however, when you look at the arm protection, like he's got a full arm harness, clearly inspired on late 15th century. Looks a little gothic because he's got the fluting. One thing about the arm, though, I could wear, because I own these. I could wear them. I have the Italian version, but I could wear my arm harness all day, and I have done it before, and sometimes I forget that I'm wearing it, and I'm only reminded by the clanking when I move. The reason is that arm harness is, in fact, in my opinion, is the one thing you feel the least because it's pointed. What this means is that the top of the armor here, in a real example, would have laces, and this lacing, which is usually covered in beeswax to make sure that it stays, it doesn't move in a weird way, it's going to have a little bit of resistance, would basically suspend your arm on attaching it onto the appropriate loops that you would have in your arming doublet, so the garment that you're wearing underneath. So your arms, you don't feel them at all. It's magic. Kind of the same with legs, but legs can be less forgiving. So if they need to be made to your specifications and then they are suspended, and as long as nothing happens to the points, they'll be fine. But arm, it's fine. Shields were not that thick or heavy anyways, because again, I'm not aware, maybe some rondella types, definitely some bucklers, but in general, the overwhelming majority of shields in history are wooden. So this idea of a full, thick metal shield that is as heavy as your door is not a thing. And even in this situation is not a thing, because you can tell it's kind of thin, and it does look like this is some kind of wooden shield covered in parchment, and so this would not be heavy. And then swords are not that heavy either. Swords can be up to 2 kilograms sometimes, so like 4 pounds is average. Depends on the sword. It can be lighter than that. It can be a little bit heavier, but generally speaking, it's lighter than that. Altogether, it does add up. Don't get me wrong. Mail is, in fact, the heaviest single component of a plate suit of armor. Unless you have like the cut one, the one that is cut here precisely because they wanted you're wearing a breastplate, who cares? So they do cut a big chunk of mail out because mail is the single heaviest component in plate armor. And I know that it's weird because often you think, well, plate is heavy and mail is medium armor in role-playing game systems. But in real armor, mail gets really heavy, friend. It gets really heavy, friend. All right, now, there is something that happens at one point, and I don't know if I can find an image of it. But maybe it's, yeah, this guy, okay. So I found the image. It's going to be a big spoiler. So if you don't want to hear the spoiler, you might need to mute me for the next 30 seconds, okay? So with that said, boom. So, this guy. First of all, I absolutely adore his helmet. It looks very Oblivion, doesn't it? And I'm not going to tell you who he is, okay? So it's not too bad of a spoiler. You might be able to recognize. Anyways, his armor looks fantastic. Fantastic. I absolutely love it. And he's wearing a barbute inspired by late 15th century Italian barbutes, although then again, he appears to be fluted. I have no problems with that because it's a different world. Incidentally, even in Gothic armor, everything is fluted except for the greaves. The greaves in Maximilian, I shouldn't even say Gothic, I apologize for that. In Maximilian armor, even more so, everything gets fluting except for the greaves. Don't ask me why. What happens here is something that doesn't really make sense from a real functional armor perspective, so I did want to point it out just to say. He gets hit by a mace strike in the back of his helmet. What that does is that it bends the helmet. Now, bending helmets or any part, component of your armor out of shape is absolutely something that happened to real armor. And of course, how susceptible to that depends on the level of heat treatment. Because if you have a steel that isn't heat treated and you hit it with a clump of metal, it will cave in. However, if you have steel that has been properly heat treated, then that's going to be a lot harder to achieve. His helmet kind of gets bent out of shape in combat. When this happens to helmets in the Middle Ages, it can compromise the helmet. It could happen that it gets bent out of shape in a way that now you can't see. And so you have to remove it. Sometimes you can't remove it and you get stuck in it. So stuff like this can absolutely happen. Because sort of armor failure, if you will. Once again, dependent on the quality. What happens here is that, and this is the spoiler, so if you muted me and you're back, mute me again. But what happens here is that someone hits him really hard in the back of the helmet with a mace, and he's here talking like nothing happened. But then when he's like, I can't remove the helmet, which, once again, so the armorer helps him out, and when he removes the helmet, and then the camera reveals that half his head is gone. Okay? So, could that type of injury happen with a real medieval helmet? It's very unlikely. I'm not going to say impossible, but with a high-level, high-quality helmet, the reason why that would be very difficult is because that's exactly why helmets exist, so that your head doesn't get caved in. And the reason why that would be extremely difficult to achieve, though you hit someone so hard that the helmet caves in, is because differently from movie props, the inside of a helmet always has a liner. A liner meaning the inside is soft and it's padded. So even if that's done, so that even if you bend a helmet out of shape with a mace, yeah, the helmet is not going to go inside your head. That's precisely the reason why that happens. You could get a concussion, you could be stunned. There are a lot of things that could happen, but unfortunately, when they remove the helmet, they reveal that the inside of the helmet has nothing, so rendering the helmet completely useless. That's the thing, because a helmet without any form of soft padding inside would be very useless. And in fact, if you look at the inside of samurai helmets, they've got liners. Inside of Roman helmets, sometimes they do, but when they don't, it's because you were supposed to wear something on top of your head and then put the helmet. But you always have to wear some kind of compensation, otherwise the helmet is not going to work. And something like this would happen. So that was a little bit, I didn't enjoy that as much, because I know how helmets work. But really, that's the only thing, because apart from that, this is incredible. I freaking love this armor. Oh my gosh, this armor look makes me think of Oblivion, and I absolutely love it. So all in all, I really liked the combat scene. It was extremely epic. The charge was epic. The armor that this guy is wearing with this kind of copperish finish looks phenomenal. Some of the suits of armor look more inspired on what we would have in heroic armor of the Renaissance rather than maybe medieval plate, but still really good. I really, really liked it. And the only other thing is that, yeah, when you have a gorget type of technology, as I was explaining, it should be worn underneath the breastplate, because you can imagine that over here, you're creating a massive gap. And that makes it dangerous, because if a blade goes under here and enters your throat, the entirety of the suit is now compromised and useless. I can't really say that there aren't any it's very rare, but there are some examples of gorget worn over but usually it's because they have something else underneath to protect. So when the gorget is your only protection or gorget is your only protection, it's going to be worn underneath the breastplate, because with that simple adjustment, you have now made it virtually impossible to get to your throat unless they manage to compromise the entire suit for whatever happened. Would you wear a sallet type helmet in this kind of combat? Let me see if I could show it. Yes. Once again, it looks a little silly, the shape, but it's fine. People do. And people did. It would not be my choice because, well, for this guy, he's wearing the sallet. It's extended in this shape so that it provides some facial protection. In our world, what this would have been is either it would have stopped here and then you would have a separate bever plate. Or, yeah, you do have situations where half of your head is exposed, but not for a joust. Ideally, for a joust, you have to protect the face. So they went with this design. It's okay. Also because he needs to be careful, because if he lifts the head a little bit and the lance goes into the mail, you're dead. But then again, I mean, the design, whatever. But I have seen people, not seen it directly, but I've spoken to people who chose the configuration of sallet plus bever, which is still fine. People did it in the Middle Ages. But they did get hit on the bever with a lance and it crushed their jaw. So did armor fail? No, it saved their lives. But I would go for either a frogmouth or an armet, or even a great helm at that point that has a little bit more plate, because to me, sallet and bever, I wouldn't trust it. And again, they survived because the armor was there, which means if the armor wasn't there, the lance would have been through their mouth entirely and would have exited the other side of the head. So the armor still did its job. It saved its user's life, but the impact can crack bones. It's just that, as I was saying, what we see in Knight of Seven Kingdoms, the half of the head was gone. That was a little... With that type of helmet, probably not. I love this guy. He's like, heck, I don't have the eye anymore, I might as well. I'm like, yeah, why not? Also, I appreciate that this is quite tight. In our Middle Ages, this would have been even tighter, or you could have had a configuration that went over the chin. So even more protection. But it's pretty decent. They went for a good one. I wonder if he's wearing anything underneath, because of course could you imagine your hair getting stuck with all the... Like, you would have to wear something here, some kind of arming coif. Sometimes they have two. In iconography, we see people removing the helmet, and you can tell that the helmet has a liner, but they also have their own coif, fabric coif underneath, so that you would have 2 layers of spacing. What do you think of his armor? I think it looks awesome. It's fantasy looking, but it looks good. At least to me. Plus, they've got the sword breakers here, which are probably my favorite feature of all types of armor anywhere, because it makes it so noble looking. Oh, the mantle as well. It's a thing. Knights did wear mantles. Sometimes they're very short, but if you look at iconography of Italian condottieri, like here is a little one, as you can see, is neatly kept in place by the shoulder pauldrons, so this is not going to give him trouble. But it is there. And we see other examples that are also a little longer. Trying to see if I can find one now. But yeah, mantles were a thing. Or capes as well were a thing. If you look at representations, for instance, of Templar knights, they did have capes. Also because it would protect the armor from the sun. It would protect the armor from heavy rain, for instance. So they have multiple functions apart from looking really, really good. But one way where we can definitely see mantles, if you want to see them right now, is church representations of angels. This guy is in scale. Oftentimes they are in plate, but you can see he's got a red mantle all the way down, the angel. And there are plenty of images of angels. So this is all AI nonsense, but there are plenty of images of angels. That's another one. They've got armor, and then they've got the long mantles, and they look awesome. So did you guys like the show? I enjoyed it very much. It's just that sometimes the humor wasn't for me, but apart from that, I thought it was awesome.